Welcome in, listeners. This is Margin Mavens, a podcast hosted by Steph and Kayla, where we share our thoughts on all things literature. Today's episode is about Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. In this story, we meet Bree Matthews as she comes to UNC Chapel Hill and upon her first night sees something she shouldn't have that changes the course of her life. We reread this book as part of our January Readalong in preparation for the next book. Remember that this chat will contain spoilers, so bear that in mind before listening. Now make sure to grab a snack and a drink unless you're driving. Then remember 10 and 2 and come hang out with us while we dive in. Man, oh man, did I still love this book.
Oh, 5 stars. Easy peasy.
I forgot kind of like the leading up to everything, right? It definitely takes some time to get to the parts that held my attention the most, right? We meet Bree, we find her and Alice at the quarry, right? And immediately we kind of see the differences in them, and that Alice is a lot more straight and narrow, right? For lack of better terms. And Bree is a lot more willing to explore. She's a lot more adventurous. She's been dealing with the death of her mother, right? And so she
is drowning in her grief.
Yeah, she's drowning in her grief. She talks about this idea of a before and after version of herself, right? And she says that this after version, right, is starkly different than the one that happens before. And a lot of that comes into play kind of with how she traverses the world around her. You know, she has a lot of moments where she talks about physically building walls up in order to like not let after Bree out and not let her emotions show. And she doesn't want people to see her crumbling and falling and stuff. And I think that that is really poignant and something that a lot of people can probably relate to, in the sense of, I don't want people to see me struggle. You know, it kind of goes into a almost like evolutionary standpoint of not wanting to be deemed weak by those around you because you don't want to seem like easy prey, you know? And this is a reread for both of us, right? This is the only reread that's going to be for both of us, because once we get into Bloodmarked, I haven't read that one. And so that'll be
I've read it.
Yeah. And so that'll be a completely different conversation, because I'm sure I will not be as cool, calm, and collected then.
No. Can confirm. You won't be.
So we first meet Selwyn, right? He is the first one of the order that we meet. And I love him. I love him. He's rough as heck in this one because he is very kind of broken in his own way, right? We start seeing a lot of pieces as to like how he was treated and how kind of his place in the order is meant to be this one of like high esteem, right? But he is still not the end all be all. There are still people above him that kind of do whatever they want because they know how to manipulate the fact that he cannot do anything back to them. And so we start seeing a lot of these kind of under concepts of the subjugation of him and the fact that he is supposed to be all powerful, right? But we end up finding out that he's really just. Yeah, he's supposed to be this.
His generation.
Yeah. And so we start seeing a lot of connections between that and the fact that he is also kind of being put into a cage, right? They're like, oh, he's powerful. It's great that he's powerful, but as long as he's doing exactly what we say. And that, I think, is a really interesting kind of connection between him and Bree, because it's the same sort of thing that she was dealing with throughout, you know, her life, with all of these sometimes microaggressions and sometimes very blatant racism, where people are okay with her presence as long as it doesn't push out of these boxes that they've put her in. And then we meet Nick. Right?
We do.
And Nick is such a cutie patootie in this one. And
he is the golden retriever to Selwyn's black cat.
Yeah, and so backing up for a second, when they're at the quarry, right? Bree ends up seeing something she shouldn't have, right? She ends up seeing a almost corp. I forgot the name that they use, but
It's
it's
sort
some
of demon.
demon.
It's a demon.
And we end up meeting some of the Order people, right? We end up seeing Selwyn working as a Merlin, right? He's working as the King's Mage. We see Tor, who has a badass bow. We see Evan is not what he seemed, right? So we meet Evan, who was Bree's friend Charlotte's boyfriend. And when we originally meet him, he's just like any other frat guy, right? He's like, oh, let's go do keg stands and live all this life or whatever. And we find out that he's actually part of the Order and is awakened, I believe. And he has all these powers and stuff. And so it's something that we kind of learn about him. And we already see those like 2 levels of people playing. I love Nick and Bree a lot in this book. Obviously, there's the draw towards Selwyn that we start kind of getting and everything like that. And so for the listeners, which I doubt, if you don't know what Legendborn is, you don't know the world that Tracy Deonn is building, right? First and foremost, change that, come back to us, right? But if you are at all interested in Legends of King Arthur, Legends of Merlin, of the Morgaine, all of these things, right? This is the book for you. Because we end up finding out that everything that we kind of know, the tales that were given, have been strategically changed to make it to where the Order is a secret, right? And so we, instead of having it be this normal idea of like reincarnation, right? We find out that the magic, the thread of each of the original knights and all of those things, they went down the genealogy, right? And within each family, there is going to be one person that becomes that scion, right? And so obviously there becomes a very obvious hierarchy, right? You have the ranking system of all of the knights. You go from, King Arthur to the Ninth Order, 10th Order, all of those things, and they all kind of fall into their place. So Bree ends up finding out that one thing about her is really interesting in the fact that she can fight off Mesmer. She can fight off kind of the Men in Black moment that Selwyn tries to pull on her.
Hypnosis of it. It that's like the comparison that I guess you could make.
Yeah. I just think of it as the little pen in Men in Black where they're like, and you won't remember nothing. Click, 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 click.
Yeah.
And so Selwyn does this to Bree on that first night in the quarry, and it doesn't hit. It doesn't stick. And then she obviously meets the dean, who the dean is not great because he has a lot of undertones of racism in his speaking, right? And then so he assigns her a peer mentor, which is when Nick comes into play. And she doesn't want anything to do with Nick. She's like, I don't need a babysitter.
She ignores him.
Yeah. And then
she ignores all of his texts, and then he quote stalks her. I don't consider it stalking because going and being like, hey, she's not answering me. Can I get her schedule? Seems pretty reasonable to me. What really gets me is that he finds her after one of her classes and full name calls her, like uses her. Now, here's the thing, okay? I don't know if everybody has the same experience that I had when I grew up, but when I heard my full name, I assumed I was in trouble.
Which she was.
And
she
9
was in
times
trouble.
out of 10, I was in trouble. So, like, reading her full name and then reading the interaction after, like, the immediate full name, my shoulders were up at my ears. I was immediately tense. I was like, oh my God, who is full naming her? And then it's just Nick being a goofy little goober we love.
And so he very quickly, right, is like, I'm meant to put you onto the right track. Like, I'm meant to watch over you, all of these things, right? And he's just kind of meant to be this like friendly face. Then Bree, in the middle of their conversation, sees a shimmer, right? Which she has now connected to this idea of these demons, of this other world that's out there, right? Which she has already connected to her mother's death, right? At this point, she is very believing that something happened to her mother and that these so-called Merlins were involved in getting rid of her memories of it and all of these things. And so she goes and she just chases down this demon, right? And when things are looking real dicey for her, turns out Nick has a genuine sword up his sleeve and manages to slay the demon after it hurts Bree, and she ends up being taken back into the order, right? And so a couple things kind of happen very quickly, right? One, we find out that Nick doesn't go back to this place very often. Two, we find out that their healer named William is very sweet and is there for her.
Yes.
Three, we find out that Nick does not have high opinions of Selwyn. And so when he knows that Selwyn is coming, he specifically says, like, let it work. Let whatever he's about to do work. And it doesn't, right? She makes a connection very quickly that if she puts herself in any sort of pain as it's happening, it will not stick and she will remember at some point whatever's going on. And so she decides on her own that she's going to track down Nick. She does a Uno reverse on him and figures out where he's going to be and goes to his class. And he immediately is flabbergasted, right? He's like, who is this girl and why is she able to break this mesmer? And he says, no, I am not helping you with whatever you've got going on. I refuse. Gonna find you another mentor. She is like, okay, I don't know who you are and why you're so used to being told you can get whatever you want, but this isn't gonna be how it works. Right? And so she ends up kind of scheming on her own and she goes to the Order Clubhouse, is what I'm gonna call it. And a girl opens the door and is like, hey, who are you? And she's like, hey, I'm Bree. Nick told me to come. Right. And she just had really great timing because it turns out that they are meeting all of the pages for this year's tournament. Right. And she's kind of confused as to why everybody is freaking out that Nick is the one that told her to come in. Right. And when he does show up, he's like, okay, we need to get you out of here. And she's like, no, we're not going anywhere. And lo and behold, he is the scion of Arthur.
Which she doesn't know.
She doesn't
know right off the bat. She knows that he's a scion.
Yeah.
Basically. She knows that he has like
some sort of ranking.
He has some sort of ranking. He doesn't want anything to do with it. And she, let's go, Bree, uses that to her advantage. Okay. Yeah. She's like, you know what? You're going to help me. Like, we're going to figure this out. And he does.
And granted, he helps her once he finds out why she's doing it. She's not just like a teenager trying to stick her nose where it doesn't belong. You know, she is fully like, hey, I think something happened with my mom and I'm trying to figure out what's going on there. And he goes, because he's got his own drama with his mother, that he wants to help. And so she finds out that he is the scion of Arthur, which makes
King
it to
Arthur.
Yeah, King Arthur, as in, you know, the big guy, the guy in charge.
Yeah.
And based on their history, their lore, right? The idea is that if King Arthur ever awakens him, which basically means giving him the abilities of him and all of those things, he becomes their king, right? So he basically said, no, thank you. I don't want this life, right? And walked away when he was like 14 years old. And so it's a really big deal that he's back, right? So throughout the course of the book, you kind of start seeing more of the relationships, right? You find out that him and Selwyn are bonded because he is the king's mage. And so a couple things are important to note there, that Nick can feel Selwyn's murderous rage. Selwyn can feel when Nick is in danger. It kind of goes back and forth. Selwyn immediately has his eyes on Bree, thinking that she is a demon. Yep. She is a Shadowborn, right? So there's three major borns in this book. There's Legendborn, which are the people that have the genes of King Arthur's knights or
They are
King
part
Arthur.
of the lineage.
Yeah, they're part of the lineage. You've got the once-borns, which are just humans, and they can be vassals or pages and yada, yada, yada. And then you have the Shadowborn, which are the demons. And so Selwyn is like, I don't believe in coincidences. You've been here way too often. You have to be a Shadowborn. Nick is like, all right, chill out. She's not. And as Bree and Nick get closer, right, I love them, Your Honor. I love them. One of my favorite scenes is right before your scene that you said was your favorite. And so one of my favorite scenes is when he says something to her, because so they go through a trial, right? And these pages will end up being tested, right? And once they pass all these trials, they can then be chosen by a scion to be their squire. And they go through the whole, bang and caboodle. And Bree is immediately kind of placed as a target because she is connected to Nick, right? Everybody wants to be Nick's squire because he is going to be King Arthur, right? That is that idea behind it. Mega brownie points for anybody who becomes his squire. And so there is a guy named Vaughn, and man, oh man, is he the worst. But he basically says, like, hey, you don't belong here, right? Spoiler alert, she's the only Black girl in this entire
I
order.
feel like that shouldn't be a spoiler because, like, that should be obvious from the get-go. We're talking about the Legend of Arthur.
Yeah.
How many Black people do you know?
But also, like, there's humans in this. Like, they're not from the lineage. They could have branched out at some point, which we find out they did, but we'll get there. We'll get there. And so Vaughn is racist, right? And basically says that she is using her feminine wiles.
That's right.
Against Nick, and is basically seducing him into whatever she wants. And she plays it really smart, I think. And she's very like, you're questioning King Arthur's judgment right now, right? And everybody needs to know that you don't think that he is capable enough to make his own decisions and yada, 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 right? Nick then kind of teases her about this and is like, so you don't want to be my squire? And let's talk a little bit more about those feminine wiles.
Yeah.
That we're talking about. And she goes, no, I wouldn't be good at this. I have never been trained and whatever. And he goes, maybe I just like watching you move. And she brushes it off. Right. And one of my favorite Nick lines is in this, where he basically says, it's okay to be nervous, but please don't dismiss the idea that I like you. Right? Because right off the bat, both of them are very drawn to each other. They have this innate trust in each other, this innate connection. Right? And so at the forefront, it's kind of just pushed as like some sort of serendipity, right? We, as this reread, right? These are a lot of moments where we get that foreshadowing towards what we find out at the end, right?
Yeah.
Especially there's a quote that Nick says he goes, when we first met, some part of me trusted you. I don't know. I just did. Right? And I'm like, man, I wonder why that happens. And so Bree and Nick get closer and they have a really cute kissing scene, which I'll let Kayla talk about now because it's her favorite. Give her a second to find it. Yeah.
I have to find the page because you just decided to rip my heart out by talking about them. So of course, obviously, they start smooching.
I don't like the way you described that, but yeah, continue.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, like, I'm trying to get, like, the timeline going. You know what I mean? Like, I think this was after the first trial, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So she's hanging out in his room. They end up falling asleep. It's all innocent and sweet, very cutesy, very demure, right? Then they get But then they get outside, and he's gonna like take her back to her dorm, make sure she gets home safe.
Also cute
And
being demure of him.
yes, very cutesy, very demure. And he's like, I'd really like to kiss you. And she's like, oh. And he goes, is that an oh no or an oh yes? And she doesn't
Consent
even
is
get
everything, guys.
yeah. And she doesn't even get like a chance to really tell him it's the second one, because the second she says second is when he goes in. So then they're just kissing out, I think, on the driveway to the the lodge or whatever. Like it's not a great, it's very open public display of affection. And all of a sudden they hear people coming, and it turns out to be Evan and Russ. And they're both Evan and Russ are having the
A
time of
jolly
their
old time.
lives.
They're like, our king
They are
is
so
getting
excited.
down.
They're like, are you coming are you coming or going? Is this a good morning kiss or a good night kiss? Like, proceed with thy gentle tonguing. And I
He
lost
says,
it.
my
Like,
liege.
yes. Sorry to interrupt, my liege. And I just
Yeah, and I love Nick's response to that even more. Or like right before that, and he goes like, "We're kind of in the middle of something, guys." Because he's so used to this attention that he gets. Right, everything about him in this world is important because he's meant to be that next king, and all of these things. He is the quote unquote prodigal child returned, and so. Then, as things start getting deeper, we go into the next trial. So their timeline has been sped up because gates are opening everywhere, demons are getting in, things look like they're going
Scions are being
towards.
awakened.
Yeah, it looks like they're going towards Calmini.
I got Comlin?
Conlon, yeah. So it's this prophesized end of the world kind of thing, that King Arthur will reawaken and his knights and his order will fight the demons and save the world, and big prophecies for big moments. And so they're moving the whole trials up, right? Because all of these scions need their squires in order to be at their best potential. And so second trial is
a scavenger hunt.
It's a scavenger hunt, which we love scavenger hunts, right? And so she immediately gets nervous because she's like, oh, I'm supposed to be with this guy that like we don't really have the greatest of relationships right now. And Selwyn steps in and is like, no, I'll take over, right? That should have been the first red flag for everybody before things escalated.
Yes.
And so remember, Selwyn is on Bree as a demon train, and he has remained on this train, has never gone off this train. And so when they're going off through the scavenger hunt, there comes a point where then they're in the cemetery, which poor Bree, because by this point,
He's been to the cemetery.
The cemetery is
before.
A traumatic place for
context.
her. Yes.
While she's dealing with the Order and Nick and Selwyn and all of that, on the flip side, her father, after the trouble with the dean, her father calls her, is like, you're going to therapy. Like, this is not up for discussion. It's happening. I've reached out to this great therapist. She knows your mom. She's got the backstory. You're going to meet her. So the first time she meets this therapist, Patricia, they are at some sort of cutesy garden place. And Patricia starts talking about, rootcraft and all of that. And Bree's kind of staring at her like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, that doesn't, what is that? And Patricia comes to realize that Bree's mother never shared that information with her. So the next time that they meet, Patricia decides to take Bree to the cemetery on campus grounds because there are a lot of Black people, enslaved people, buried there. And her ancestor, Patricia's ancestor in particular, is buried there. And she wants to tap into... Basically, the premise of Rootcraft is you are temporarily borrowing root from your ancestors to perform whatever magic it is that you need to perform. In Patricia's case, she's not quite a medium. I don't remember exactly what she is.
But she can
But
go
she
through
is
like memories.
she can go through memories. Bree's mother was a wild crafter. She had an affinity for herbs and plants and things of that nature. We meet a medium later on named Mariah, who helps Bree a lot at the end of this book. But basically, the cemetery there's no headstones, there's no grave markers. It's just hundreds of buried black bodies. So back to the scavenger hunt, Bree's uncomfortable going there because she knows what's there. She knows what's underneath the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Continue, my darling.
Thank you. And so Selwyn, this entire time, the whole premise of the scavenger hunt is that there's items with riddles, right? Pretty normal scavenger hunt things. But then he's also got his hounds, and they're kind of just lurking around, and they're tracking the other pages, and they're trying to see like who gets the most items and all of those things. When they're in the cemetery, he starts questioning her, right? And she ends up getting attacked by his hounds, and she realizes that it was a setup, that the reason he came with her was to set her up and kind of put her in this position of tell me the truth or kill me kind of thing.
Right.
Because he is fully like she is a demon. He realizes a little too late that she is not a demon, right? And he's like, oh, okay, right? And then they end up attacked by other hounds. And
Foxes.
yeah, and he didn't sense them because he was so focused on dealing with Bree.
Her.
And so they go through a battle, and by this point, Bree has had one other instance where she ends up having what they call, so their magic they call ether. And so she ends up having a moment where red ether kind of shows up on her hands, and she's like, what is this? You know, as
He
anyone
later
would
learns
do.
is her root.
Yeah. And
coming
so
forward.
And so she ends up slaying one of the
Doing that
foxes in front of him.
with
And
that.
he's like, hey, question.
How did you
We
do
pull
that?
our ether out of the air, right? The environment around us. You like generate it in yourself. So what's going on there? And she's like, I have no idea, dude. The reason I bring up this scene specifically is there's a point in this once all the other Legendborn, like they escape, they get away. The other Legendborn catch up to them. And when they explain what happens, right, when Selwyn's like, oh, these foxes came in, right, all of them immediately clock like, hey, King's Mage, you're meant to sense these pretty easily, right? So how did they manage to sneak up on you? And Nick clocks it and is like, hey, what were you doing?
Immediately.
Yeah, he's like, what were you doing that you were distracted? Because remember, Nick can feel that murderous rage, right? And so that's kind of one of the things that led him to know that something was going on was, you know, hypothetically, he was able to feel that Selwyn was feeling these feelings, right? And so Nick has a little bit more information than the rest of them because he's realizing that the feeling Selwyn was feeling was not just towards the foxes. And Nick decks him in the face.
Which Bree immediately pegs as something that's not really cool on Nick's part, because part of Selwyn's oath is that he cannot intentionally harm Nick. So by Nick decking Selwyn, it's putting Selwyn at a disadvantage. And now Selwyn just has to sit there, stand there, and take it. And this rage is like boiling inside of him because there's nothing he can do. He can't defend himself like that against Nick.
And so it's a glimpse into that idea that we were talking about earlier where Selwyn is powerful. And that's the first moment where Bree kind of sees like camaraderie in him, in the fact that he's just meant to take. He's not allowed to react to anything.
He needs to sit down and shut up, just like she's essentially been told multiple times already in this book.
And so there's that connection between them because she's like, hey, Nick kind of is abusing his power a little bit there, because Nick owns up to it and says, like, that is why he did it, is because he knew that Selwyn could not do anything back. And one of the first moments, really, where I got the ick from Nick. But moving
the
forward.
only moment I got the ick from him is really that scene.
That's
Everything
fair.
else sort of makes a little bit more sense.
Okay.
We're gonna talk about this when we're done rehashing this book. Okay.
So then as it moves forward, right, we now have
Selwyn.
Selwyn.
Get my second favorite scene, for the record, when William is healing Bree. My second and third favorite scenes. Yeah. Because then we get the, shall I heal your ass? Or are you still worried I'm going to check it out? Because we discover William is, yes.
William's a fruity guy.
Yeah. He doesn't just smell like citrus. He is.
He's a little citrusy.
Yeah. And then, so, Brianna is in pain. She's hurting. She's achy. She's bruised. So she's like, you know what? Fine. I'm not cute. So I guess you can heal my ass. Like, it's fine. Yeah. And of course,
Nick walks in,
because he is what he is. Nick is anxious to check on Bree and make sure that she's okay. And he walks in and he immediately is just like, oops, sorry. And William,
he's so funny.
Reason number 560 why I love William, okay? Because he immediately goes, in past centuries, some courtiers, how do you pronounce this word? Thank you. Wanted nothing more than for an eligible king to accidentally see them naked. And he just like,
he's like, wow, you're different.
Yeah.
He's like, you're freaking out. Like, people have done this on purpose before.
Yeah. Like, what's happening there? But anyway, continue. I just needed to call that out because I love those scenes.
Yeah, I love the little scenes where there's another scene where I think Russ calls Nick a knight errant. And she's like, what's that mean? And it's a knight that goes off on his own and isn't like with his order and stuff. And Nick comes in and is like, who's a knight errant? And there's just a lot of scenes that are really cute. So after the cemetery scene, despite what you might assume, right, Selwyn and Bree kind of find a sense of camaraderie, and she feels a lot more comfortable with him now. Because he kind of comes with this moment of like, you are not a threat, and therefore I will not treat you as such.
And he makes it a joke, though. Yeah. Because from here on out in the book, once he realizes that she's not a threat, he's like, I can't believe I thought you were a threat. Yeah. Like, he teases her about it. And actually, it aggravates her.
She's like, I am a threat. I'm so scary.
She's so scary. She's so scary. But she's not scary to Selwyn at all. Yeah. Like, it's just really chef's kiss dynamic between the two of them.
And so she finally ends up telling him the whole reason she's even going into this order, right? And they decide that they're going to work together, right? So Nick, by this point, is being jetted away often to these other chapters.
He's doing Scion of Arthur things.
Recon, yeah. They know that the gates are opening. They know that Calmine is approaching, as far as these people believe. And so he's going off and kind of checking everything with his dad and whatever. So they're spending a lot of time, Selwyn and Bree, where they're able to kind of just investigate things on their own. And she ends up getting kind of more of a glimpse into Selwyn and Nick's upbringing, because they end up going into Lord Davis's house and going through the files, and they're finding all these things. They find out about Selwyn's mom. And things just start making sense, right? In the sense that everything that they know is not accurate, right? Things have been planted along the way to kind of create the narrative that would benefit those who are doing wrong, which is a relevant theme throughout life and throughout literature, but specifically throughout this book, is the winners are usually the ones that do that narrative. Right. And so we see that firsthand kind of unraveling. We also see this idea of Nick becoming upset that Selwyn is kind of there for Bree. And he has a moment where I mean, this moment kind of gives me an ick, right? Where he's like, I don't know why you're defending him, right? I don't know. Like, he's upset because Selwyn was there for her. He's upset that they investigated the stuff
Mhm.
and all of these things, right? And I guess I don't know necessarily if it's an ick kind of thing, but I think it wraps into this idea of Selwyn is meant to be someone that Nick can trust, right? He even says that at some point, like, I don't trust him right now, but I need to be able to trust him, and that becomes a problem and everything.
Right.
But I think Nick didn't want the legacy that he has, right? But when it is kind of convenient for him, it seems as though he really leans into it, you know?
Yeah.
And that I think is the permeating ick that I kind of get from Nick. And so when
That's fair. Because that's a lot like, I mean, there's that parallel of whiteness at work,
yeah,
like white people utilizing and abusing their privilege to hold black and brown people
yeah.
down. Like,
Mhm.
so yeah, I can see that. And I wonder if that was intentional or
I'm
unintentional
sure it
to
was
make
because
that
Tracy is a
parallel.
god amongst
But
women.
yeah, truly, like it's that added layer of like, see, like even who you see as a good guy
Is doing it, even if he doesn't
still
know it or not.
benefits
Yeah,
from his privilege
yeah,
without realizing it.
and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
and it's the fact that he has been one of Bree's biggest cheerleaders, but he's still the first one to be like, "Hey, we don't like Selwyn," and she's like,
Which I have
"Eh,
thoughts about why, but like I don't want to jump ahead to like
yeah,
spoilers.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah."
I will share my opinion
We'll get there
later.
probably when we get to that book.
Yeah.
Um, but we see a lot of this kind of happening with Nick, where once he starts stepping into that mantle of Arthur, right? He has a lot of really grand ideas about how it's going to work, right? But we
Right.
see a very divisive rift, kind of the
Mhm.
foreshadowing of one between Bree and Nick,
Right.
because she has that moment of like, we need to find out what happened to my mom. And he's like, I will do everything in my power once I am king, right? Because my rule becomes law and there won't
Right.
be like a council that is in charge. And she basically hints at the fact that something needs to be done to whoever, had anything to do with her mom's death. And he asks a question of her of like, what would you have me do? And we don't get an answer for it, right?
Mhm.
But it becomes that very well known, I think, trope within these ideas of like love triangles and stuff is like one is um m- reminder to everyone, have only read Legendborn, keeping that.
She has not read Bloodmark, so pump your brakes.
Yeah. But it from just this one, it's very much the dichotomy because we end up finding out that Selwyn has the workings of another love interest, right? That's obviously built upon the foundation is here in this one. We don't, once again, Bloodmark who. Um, but because the difference between them when it comes to Bree really is evident in the fact that Nick feels as of right now as the type of guy that's like, for the betterment of the world, right? If I have to sacrifice my relationship. Whereas Selwyn's like, I would let it burn for her. Um,
It's more how do I put this? It feels more like Nick wants to protect Bree at all costs,
mhm,
whereas Selwyn's like, you can protect yourself, but I'm going to be right there
yeah.
in case anybody steps out of line. Like
Mhm.
that's more. I don't think because at the end of the book and everything, you get like
The submission and stuff, yeah.
this. Yeah, like I don't think Nick would like. I don't think Nick would sacrifice their relationship for the betterment of the world. I think he would sacrifice their relationship to keep her safe.
Mhm, mm,
Whereas Selwyn
I see.
would burn the whole world down
Yeah.
to keep her safe
Um, I think
with
having
her.
read like Iron Widow and stuff, my answer to this problem is really just like make it a polycule, you know? Like,
Listen, Tracy Deonn, if you're listening to this, I recognize that they're young and I am old and I should, like, it's not, I just need them, the three of them,
Okay,
okay,
no less dose, you know?
to have a happy ending. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell you how to do it.
Yeah, I
But
trust you. Yeah.
I really need the three of them.
And so,
Anyway,
story progresses, right? One thing that's important is we find out, yes, what's up?
I was going to go back to Patricia, Mariah, and Bree's own personal plot line happening.
Yeah.
So Patricia introduces Mariah, who is a medium, another practitioner of Root, who wants to contact one of Bree's ancestors to get some information. Like, figure out what Bree is, what she can do, such and such. The walls that Bree has built up since the death of her mother and her refusal to really, like, deal with her grief prevents this from being a successful process.
Yeah.
To the point that Patricia's like, I can't help you
with what you need. Because Bree
with what you need.
Because by this point, Bree doesn't know that it was just an accident. And so she's
Right.
very much like, we need to figure what happened and like make them pay. And they're like,
yeah,
we're
she's
all about
too
acceptance
angry.
and moving on.
Right. And she's also too angry at her mother to be able to put that aside and have a connection with her ancestors. So at this point, Bree is like falling apart. She's going through it. Like, Patricia's dropping her as, you know, things aren't great with Nick and the
order.
The order. I can't, I'm trying to remember the timeline. Her dad comes in and really, like,
that's right before the ball.
That's right before the ball, right?
Yeah.
Did we want to talk about the third trial? I know you're going on a Selwyn Bree, like, arc branch.
We can talk about the trial. So the third trial ends up being
trial by combat.
What was the first trial?
The first trial was the boars, the hell boars.
Yes. Okay.
Which, not really important. That one's not important.
Yeah. Second trial, scavenger hunt. Third trial, trial by combat, right? And so by this point, Bree has been receiving training, not really to make her the best fighter because she's on a time crunch, but make it to where she can gain as many points before she loses, right? And so one of my favorite scenes is she ends up fighting Vaughn, right? Which, remember, is that racist guy that is gunning for to become Arthur's squire. And
but before that, we can't discount the first two battles that she has. So the first one is with Sydney. And Sydney, even though Cindy wins that, she's still furious because Bree lasted longer than she expected her to. And then Bree's fighting, I believe it was Blake, who's big and strong, but she's faster than him. So she just lets him do what he needs to do. And then she takes him out. Like, she wins that fight. And everybody's like, whoa, like, Nick's excited.
Selwyn gives her a nod of acknowledgement, right?
Which blows her mind.
Yeah, and she's like, wait, we're friends now? Because another thing that's important to note is that Selwyn, after the scavenger hunt, kind of starts viewing Bree in a different light, right? No longer viewing her as Shadowborn. So he's kind of just watching her. And that kind of comes into some things that we'll talk about in a couple minutes. But he decides that with her training and stuff, he ends up training her personally because he's like, and he puts it off as this, like, I'm tired of watching you, like, lose this pathetically.
Fail spectacularly.
Yeah, but it becomes, you can, the reader knows that it's a lot more of like, he's got his own beef with the order, right? He has basically been bullied into doing whatever the order wants. And so when he sees that people are bullying Bree, he's like, we're going to make sure that you can beat these bullies. And so they train and stuff. So they're a lot closer now. And so this third fight happens with Vaughn, and cutting through the fight sequence, Bree ends up winning. Right?
Yes.
And everyone is aghast, everyone was shocked, everyone was super happy for her. And she goes and she's looking at Nick, and Nick is smiling, and then Nick immediately, his smile drops because Vaughn goes for a dirty shot. Right?
Mhm.
I don't know if the dirty shot was meant to kill her or if it was just meant to hit her. You know, that's
I
kind of
think
left. Mhm.
given that he hit her collarbone
Mhm.
and knowing how talented he is, I don't think it was meant to be a killing blow. I think it was meant to
Let off
send a
some
message
aggressiveness, yeah.
to
That he is
send a
still
message
better.
to her and to
Yeah.
send a message to Nick.
Yeah, of like, I'm still the
You know,
better
like,
option. Yeah.
I'm still the better option. This is what I'm willing to do. This is what I'm capable
Yeah.
of. Things like that.
And it backfires tremendously, right? Because
Tremendously.
Nick ends up kicking him out of the trials and basically telling him, like, there is no place for you in this order because you fight dirty, right? And so as things progress, right, Bree ends up having the understanding that her mother's death was unfortunately just an accident, right? So she finds a locket that her mother had left and blows everything
Thanks
out
to
of,
her dad.
yeah, blows everything out of the water, right, as she
So
knows it.
what happens is the second that she like touches this bracelet, like root basically explodes,
Mhm.
and it unlocks a memory that was erased when she was a child, and it's her mother explaining everything to her. And we discover that the reason why her mother creates this is because part of the curse on her family, specifically her line, is that only one daughter can have these powers, like be able to practice rootcraft at a time. Which we learn more about later, but it's important to note that Bree's mother created this so that she could explain it not just to younger Bree, but to older Bree as well.
Yeah,
Like,
because she
hey,
knew
if
she
you're
wouldn't
seeing
be,
this,
yeah.
I'm gone. And like, it's important that you understand all this. And it's really interesting to see like Bree watching this memory unfold and watching her younger self, and her younger self like recognizing the conversation as it's happening and like what it means for the future, and like being upset and starting to
Yeah.
cry and like things like that. And it's just like a really great scene from an eldest daughter point of view and a mom point of view, for me specifically, just having that sort of like heal Bree a lot.
Yeah,
And
that
like
bridge between why did her mother not tell her and stuff.
why, and now she understands why, because she knew that if her mother had told her, like it would have changed the trajectory of Bree's life in a way that would have been detrimental to Bree and to her mother.
Mhm.
But it makes sense as to why she felt so strongly about Bree going to Carolina, why she felt so strongly about the way that Bree was acting and behaving, even if she was just a kid, like the fear in Bree's mother knowing that at some point she's not going to be able to, like, she will not see her daughter grow up. Like it just will not happen.
Yeah. And so Bree ends up having a lot of information given to her through this. And so she realizes, like, my mom did all of this work to keep me out of here, and I stupidly walked
Right.
into it. Right. Her words,
Right.
not mine. And
She's going to quit.
she quits. And so she ghosts everyone. Right.
She blocks Nick.
She blocks Nick because he won't stop calling her. Right. She
Mhm.
drops back into Alice, which Alice I think is such an interesting character because you really don't like her in the beginning because she's so mean to.
He's not. See, because I specifically wrote a note about
Mhm.
this, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was like, like, I forgot how frustrating Alice's response to the
Mhm.
whole Corey situation, because Alice is very much your type A
Yeah.
kind of person. She gets great grades. She worked incredibly hard to get into this program. Like, she takes her education seriously. She, so when the quarry happens, she lashes out at Bree, sort of blaming Bree for everything, which is outrageously unfair, but it's also so appropriate for 16-year-olds.
Yeah, for that age group. Yeah, for
you
sure.
forget that they're just 16.
Yeah. And so Alice is a hard character to like in the beginning, but it's purposeful because you only see her through the lens of Bree, who's dealing with all these other things, right? And she doesn't really have a best friend that feels safe and supportive to her.
Right.
But then also on Alice's end, she randomly is being told by this guy she's never seen that Bree has gone to a frat party and like all of these things, right? And even Bree calls out Nick for this and is like, I would never do that. You need to
come up with better lies.
Better. Like,
yeah.
All of these things. But
Alice also taps Bree's dad into like getting her into therapy, and then Alice is the reason why he shows up to campus to take Bree out for breakfast. Like, Alice is, and he says this at least twice to my knowledge.
Alice is a really good friend. I just wish that Alice was a good friend in front of Bree and not just
read Bloodmarked.
All right. Obviously. No, I was ending it here. This was the end of the Legendborn series. Thank you guys for being here. I hope you appreciate the next ones.
Don't talk about my girl like that. Read Bloodmarked.
But alas, in this one, right, I just wish that she would have been a better friend in front of Bree, because Bree really needed that. Because she's wading in like very unfamiliar waters, which is why I think it's so easy for her to kind of get swept into the current, because she's dealing with this whole new environment.
But also, Bree's not being open and honest with Alice.
Yes.
So like, Alice can't support.
Yeah, she doesn't have all the facts.
You can't.
I get it.
Yeah, you can't support somebody that you love if they're not willing. She does become
a lot cooler to me once she has all the facts and is immediately like, so we'll get there in a second. So Bree cuts everyone off. She has a very important conversation with her dad. She decides that she's going to the ball. She goes to the order, right? Because she is going to say goodbye to them, right? She's like, I'm going to follow what my mom said and not be involved.
She meets up with, after the bracelet, she meets up with Patricia and Mariah again. And this time she's able to successfully get into contact with her grandmother.
Yep.
It's important to note that she discovers through this process that she's a medium because her grandmother essentially possesses her.
Lives in a little mental house
in her brain. And it's a really...
It's so fun and interesting.
It's fun, but it's a nice little like comedic relief almost for what the heaviness of the end of the book
what's about to be. Yeah. So she ends up having her grandmother in her head, right? And she paints a really nice picture of like, I have a house in my head that she is living in. And her grandmother kind of gives her these like little tidbits here and there. And she goes to the ball with the full intention of saying goodbye to all of these people, right? And first thing is we meet Lord Davis's King's Mage.
Isaac.
And he sucks.
He's a piece of crap.
Yeah, he sucks. And the grandmother immediately is also like, I hate this guy. His eyes are weird.
Yeah.
Why is he looking at us? All of those things. And then Selwyn kind of saves her from it. And so they're standing next to each other when the actual ceremony is beginning, right? Mind you, Bree has dropped out of the tournament. So she's just meant to, in her head, she's just there, right? And so all of these scions are going through and naming the pages that they're turning into squires, and they do, their little ceremony and stuff. And then it gets to Nick, and Bree has that moment of...
She realizes right away.
She goes, oh, dear God, please don't say my name, And Nick, being Nick, is immediately like, oh, I'm going to choose Bree Matthews as my squire, right? And so she accepts, right? She's like, I'm going to forge my own path, stuff like that. She kind
I'm
of,
my mother's daughter.
yeah.
Like, I'm gonna move forward.
Yeah. And so she does this, and then everything goes to hell. And how does everything go to hell, you may ask?
So many different ways.
So
First
she
and
and
immediately,
yeah,
she gets
yoinked. She gets yoinked.
no. She has all
Oh,
this
yeah, the racist
racism and
tirade, yeah,
bigotry like thrown in
slammed
her
at her.
face
Yeah.
because the audacity
Yeah.
of a black woman
Yeah.
to have a position like that,
Yeah, where
which
she now
is
outranks basically everyone except
yes,
Arthur
Nick. Yeah,
and the King's Mage.
but also like for those of you that have read Bloodmarked, this isn't spoilers, but it's very, very, very like good foreshadowing as to what Bree is about to go into.
Yeah.
And like when you pick up Bloodmark and you start reading it and like you like it
Things make sense.
everything starts in this moment.
Yeah, and so she deals with this racist tirade, right? So Selwyn immediately gets her out of it. And he's upset
Yes.
because this is the kind of stuff he's been dealing with his entire life, right? But now it's geared not just
Towards Bree.
Yeah, now it's not geared towards him, it's geared towards Bree for something that she had no control over, right? She hadn't done anything to upset these people. You know, it wasn't as though she was half demon like he is, where he probably is like, oh, like it makes sense because we're always taught Shadowborn bad. So he gets really upset. She has a really cute moment with Nick where he basically says, like, it's you and me, we're gonna change everything. And
then Nick gets pulled away.
And then Bree gets Isaaced. And she gets yoinked, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately for us listeners, we find out very quickly that Nick's father is the Woist because one, also racist, right? He hid it very well because he's racist and he's sexist. But he hid it very well, but in that way that like anybody who's dealt with people like him would be able to clock it, you know? But it's one of those things that it does catch Bree kind of off guard. And we find out that he was the one that purposely opened the gate, 20 something years ago and is trying to push this prophecy forward because he wants Nick to be awakened.
Power.
He wants the power that comes with Arthur being awakened.
I know we've said this before in previous episodes, and I'm gonna say it again. Power and white supremacy are two drugs that white people will not and cannot let go of.
Yeah. And so we find out that he's pushing this prophecy forward. He's hoping that Nick will be awakened so that he can kind of push Nick towards his own agendas and everything that he wants and stuff like that. He doesn't want Nick in power for Nick's own goals and ideas and autonomy. He wants Nick in power so that he can control him. And Bree ends up getting out. And things are going haywire. So she makes
You forgot about Alice.
Yes. Sorry. They kidnapped Alice, which causes Bree and Alice to have that conversation of like, hey, I have things I need to tell you.
Yes.
And so Alice immediately becomes a lot cooler to me. Because
she's immediately like, you're not doing this by yourself.
Yeah.
Let's go. So we don't have time to argue. Let's go.
So they go back to the order. Bree is kind of explaining to everybody what's going on. And she's expecting it to be a lot harder of a sell. But we find out that they had a lot more trust in Selwyn than he even imagined, right? Because they're like, okay, Selwyn mentioned that he thought Lord Davis was doing this. They heard the argument that Lord Davis and Nick were having, right? And then everything around them has kind of gone to hell. And so then the book gets really painful.
It does, right? Real fast.
Because as things are progressing, we find out that they have to go and basically save Nick from his dad. And so the group of them go
into tunnels. Which we know exist because Selwyn took Bree after
the cemetery.
After the Hell Foxes appeared.
Yeah.
Yes, he took Bree underground to keep them both safe.
Yeah. And so all of them go in, right? Mind you that these squires are officially bonded with their people. So William's got his squire and all of these partners are together and they're, fighting one-on-one and stuff. And as we're going through these tunnels, they start running into demons.
Mm-hmm. They're split up.
Split up.
Bree, Fitz, and Evan ends up being a trio because everybody else is paired off with their respective squire.
Yeah.
It gets to the point where at some point they hear like squeaking and it sounds like a bat. And at first they assume that it's just bats, but it's not bats. They're winged demons. They're little imps.
Yeah.
And Fitz is essentially dropped from a extremely high height.
He's impaled. Man's is killed.
Bree is
distraught, but she immediately compartmentalizes.
I was gonna say she's not distraught. She becomes more resolute because she says no more deaths.
Yeah,
and she means it.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, and it comes back later on. But as her and Evan are walking, and she realized it hits her all of a sudden that she can't hear Evan's footsteps. And you know whose other's footsteps she can't hear? Selwyn's. Why? Because he's part demon.
Yeah. And so we find out that the Evan that we've known this entire time has never been Evan and has been a demon portraying Evan.
Yes.
And so she fights him and stuff like that, drops him from his own, cliff, essentially makes it back to the others, right? And
Grandma comes in, real clutch.
Comes in, helps, comes back to the others, right? This is where a lot of bad things happen.
But also, like, a couple really great things happen.
Yeah.
So during the battle, we have Whitty. I think it's Whitty and then Russ are both killed, which is really hard because Russ was probably one of my favorite side characters. But we have a moment where Nick is obviously fighting being awakened. Like you can see it. Like he's physically like bent over, like on his knees, trying to fight this so hard. And then he realizes that if he doesn't, step into his role, it's going to cost at the very least Bree's life.
Yeah.
So he goes and he grabs Excalibur. Tugs on it to pull it out of the sword. He says what needs to be said.
He's awakened and grabs Excalibur.
And nothing happens.
And the sword don't move.
No.
Sword stays in the stone, guys.
But you know what? You know what happens? Grandma pops up in Bree's head, right? And it's like, hey, okay, she's here. Here you go. I have
something to show you.
I have something for you. And then Bree goes on what is hands down probably the most difficult. And now I've read Bloodmarked, so I know what I'm saying when I say this. The most difficult memory walk of her entire life. And she goes back to her very, very first ancestor, Vera. And we find out that Vera is enslaved by Nick's
Davis.
great
Davis.
Whatever. And she is raped. She's sexually assaulted because back then that is what happened, which is why there's no trigger warning for this, because we all need to sit here in our discomfort about that, because that is real life history that we're talking about. And she realizes that she needs to leave. Like, it's not safe for her. She becomes pregnant. She realizes it's not safe, and she runs. And as she's running, she can hear the hounds, because as we all are aware, one thing that was done, and the reason why police exist, is because they were tasked with hunting down escaped enslaved people and bringing them back. So while she's doing that, she cuts her hand and she's begging her ancestors to help her. Like, please help me. I want to be free. I need my child to be free. And they're like, okay, we'll do this, but it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
And the cost is, you know, it can only go from one daughter to the next daughter. There will be no overlap.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes into Vera running away successfully, and then it continues to where Bree's lines sort of converge, and Arthur steps in, and Bree successfully pulls Excalibur out of the stone. Because Bree is the scion of Arthur.
Which, for all the racists in the order,
get bent.
Is no bueno for them.
No. But there's this really interesting part where, because I could hyperfixate and info dump about this all day. Because Bree is a medium, right? She's got two
Not only is awakened.
lines.
Yeah,
she's awakened. But like, she's got two lines of magic, essentially. She's got her rootcraft line, right? And then she's got the Arthur line. So she has to deal with Arthur being able to possess her.
Yeah. So it's not just his abilities and his kind of demeanor, right? So everybody who awakens has like a second where the spirit wakes up and says something, right? But then they go back to themselves. They just have their abilities. Arthur fully just inherits Bree's body and is able to talk through her, act through her, and stuff like that.
Yep.
And Lord Davis.
It's a really great scene, though.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's a really great scene of her like learning from him, but also putting her foot down and being like, no.
You're not treating our friends like this, you know?
No, like and okay.
And so, yes.
Continue.
Oh,
I'm just, again, I will info dump on this.
And this so Lord Davis tries and fails to get the order to attack Bree. Right? And Arthur does not stand for that. And he's like, you dare call my knights against me after you've done all this. And listen, listeners, I am such a slut for King Arthur and his lore and his myths and all of that. One of my favorite Disney original movies is Avalon High.
Sword in the Stone?
No. Oh. Well, no, because I'm saying Disney original because those are the like live action, like that brand, right? But Sword in the Stone is beautiful. But is Avalon High, where follows the premise of reincarnation and all of those things. But so he immediately is like, you would dare call my knights against me after you've done all of this, right? And so the order fights with her, right? Because they have like, it's in their very bones, okay?
It's in their blood, in their lineages.
And
that is their king. When the fighting is done.
When all is said and done, right? All of them
Arthur, man.
Start kneeling because Arthur tells them to, right?
Arthur demands it.
Yeah, he's like, you know.
You don't kneel for your king anymore?
Yeah, he's like, what is this? But the thing that's really important is that he looks over at Nick, right? Because remember, up until this point, Nick was meant to be Arthur. So everyone's like, who that guy then? Because he's awoken. And so Arthur turns to Nick and is like, Lancelot, my brother, my most loyal friend. And then things start making sense as to why Nick and Bree were immediately drawn to each other, because it's in their blood. It's in their lineage.
Yes.
It brings in that question of like how much of it was
exactly how much of Nick being Nick, and like standing up against Selwyn is because of that Lancelot Arthur connection between Nick and Bree. Like how much of their feelings and emotions is legit, and how much is, which of course could also dive into the whole, Arthur and Lancelot, they were in love.
They were gay, Your Honor. Anyways.
They were gay, Your Honor. But, that would make some people's heads explode. And
it's cool.
As much as I enjoy doing that, we don't have time for that right now. You would think that the story would end here. dear listeners,
They
it
were
does not.
roommates,
No,
Your Honor.
it does not end here, okay? Because she doesn't even get the chance to really chit-chat with Nick.
Yeah.
Right? Because she immediately collapses. Once Arthur gets his little ego stroked,
Yeah, she's like, that's enough. You can go now.
that's enough. Yeah, and then she collapses. When she
Mhm.
wakes up, she's in the infirmary back at the lodge.
Mhm.
And all of us, and they're chit-chatting about all of this. Selwyn comes in and is like, where's Nick?
Yeah.
And they're like, what do you mean, where's Nick? And he's like, Nick's not here. Because,
Yeah.
of course, King's Mage bonded
Yeah.
with Nick. He can tell that Nick's not here.
Yeah.
He realizes that it was Lord Davis and Isaac because he was in the kitchen getting a little snacky snack, and Isaac came in and mesmered him, and then Selwyn literally just came to, like, within minutes of showing up in the lodge.
Miles away. Yeah.
Miles away.
He was like, I was taken out of the picture and they yoinked Nick. Right? And
which brings up the issue of who's in charge now. Right?
Yeah. Well, because we find out that the whole reason this is done is because Lord Davis, obviously knowing how the order works, is like, you need all of the knights, and now I have your Lancelot, right? Like, you will not be a full thing,
you can't
but your
call
king
the table.
is awakened, which means that when Calmine shows up, right, you will not be ready.
Right.
Anyways, continue info dropping.
So, what happens next is a power vacuum, because who's in charge? Like Selwyn?
Yeah.
Even though nobody really is sure what to do with him.
This freaking girl, Victoria, stepped in, full chest, says, I'm in charge. And everyone's like, wait.
Bree's king. She's like, Bree, and of course, Tor goes on to this misogynistic, racist moment, to which Brianna explains to them how this is possible.
Yeah.
And William and Selwyn have all these lineages, freaking family trees going on, right? And they're able to find the Davis that owned the plantation that Vera was enslaved on.
Yeah, because that becomes the original iteration of
a new line of Arthur.
And the whole Lancelot thing. Because we also find out that Davis's wife was sleeping with Lancelot.
Lancelot.
Oh, such a slut for the lore, guys. So
then, Tor refuses to acknowledge that Bree is.
Which, man, I really wanted to like Tor, but she threw out the diversity line.
Wait. But, I mean, Alice gets a really cute thing where before Brianna can even, like, defend herself, Alice steps in and is like, I'm sorry, aren't you third ranked?
Yeah.
And it's chef's kiss.
She's like, I listened to William. He's dropped information. I know how this works. She's a type A+ student. She's going to understand things.
Who, by the way, is gay. Like,
love her.
Just tossing that out there.
Love her once she starts knowing all the information. And
so then we have
one of my favorites. Good scene.
Then we have the scene where, like, there's something that Bree kept from everybody, and Selwyn clocks it immediately, and they share a look of, like, I'm gonna tell you later, right? So then they go off, and she's like, do you want to take a walk? And he's like, okay, I'll take a walk with you. And they have he calls her, what did he call her?
Cariad.
Yes.
Which means love, guys. Which means love.
But she was like, I'm not unpacking that.
She also doesn't know what it means.
She doesn't know what it means, but she doesn't want to know what it means.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't want to unpack all of that.
Yeah.
She tells Selwyn that the person who mesmered her and her father in the hospital was his mother. And he's like, that's not possible. Like, even if she did escape the prisons that she was in, like, the blood, because when you're half demon, eventually the demon blood overtakes their humanity, as far as they're aware. He's like, that should have, like, kicked in. She shouldn't have been able to, like,
do this thing.
She wouldn't be able to do this. And, Bree clocks clocks the whole, listen, they've lied to us about this, and this, who say they're even being honest about the demon blood.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know what's
That'd
truth
be a great
and what's
way to keep the king's
fiction.
mages in check.
In line. Yeah, exactly.
You need this oath or else you're going to go crazy.
Exactly. So they have a really sweet moment, and, you know, the book wraps up with Selwyn taking Bree. Like, Selwyn sort of steps into that king's mage position for Bree without realizing it.
Yeah, and he tells Bree, like, you need
a king's mage.
And she's like, you're already bonded to Nick. You know, like, she's like, can't happen. That's something we have to deal with at some point, but like, not right now. You know, her biggest priority is getting Nick back. And that's how the book ends. You know, we find out that, you know, got blood marked over there looking at it menacingly. And we know that that's where it's going to go, is figuring out how she's going to deal with that power vacuum. And Kayla already knows how it gets figured out and stuff like that. But this has been Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. It's my second time reading this book in a span of a year.
My second time.
And the fact
that it still holds up.
The fact that the rereadability is really important in this book, and the fact that you can know exactly what's going on, but the second read through, you're noticing things that you didn't notice in the first one because you had no reason to clock it.
Yes. This is a book you have to read twice because the amount of foreshadowing, as somebody who's read Bloodmarked, okay? If you've already read Bloodmarked and you're waiting for Oathbound, you need to reread Legendborn and Bloodmarked, because I can almost guarantee you Bloodmarked has as much foreshadowing about Oathbound as Legendborn has of Bloodmarked. And I'll just leave it at that.
Which I'm so glad you've said that, Kayla, because where can they find a nifty little read-along schedule for Bloodmarked?
When I create it and post it,
well, by the time this comes out, it'll be right before. We're filming this a little ahead of schedule.
We hope.
Yeah. We're filming this a little...
Let's not write checks we can't cash yet. Okay?
I can cash all my checks. I don't know about you. I'm fueled by caffeine. I can cash them all.
We're talking to people, I'm people who are mentally unwell and at the whims of hormonal instability.
By the time this video comes out, listeners, I will cash the check. You'll be able to go over to our...
The check will be cashed somewhere.
You can go over to our Instagram, and there will be graphics and everything about that read-along leading up to Oathbound. Okay? Tracy Deonn, if you happen to be here and listening, first off, we love you. Second off, please let us market your book.
We trust.
Please come on the podcast. Begging.
I'm not even gonna... No. Listen, I'm marketing your books whether you like it or not, okay?
I'm begging.
Respectfully.
I'm begging. I need to know.
We do this a lot.
I've got a lot of questions. I've got a lot of questions that are niche, but only an author can answer. You know? Like, there's a lot of stuff in my brain that needs to be let out.
Like, we're assuming that the parallels between, you know, white privilege, white supremacy, and all of that, like, are those intentional, or were those just happy little accidents? We're assuming it's intentional.
Yes, you know?
Exactly.
But thank you guys for listening and hanging out with us today. If you have not already, consider following us on Instagram at Margin Mavens. For those interested in the camera-on version of our episodes, you can get those by subscribing to our Patreon, which will be linked below. And as always, remember you are loved and that we appreciate you.